Chapter 31 Con Game. In 1951, the police raided a deluxe pleasure house nestled in the hills above Sunset Strip, apprehending its madam, Billie Bennett, and seizing her customer's ledger. The ledger was to become famous, for it was a golden book of Hollywood celebrities, habitual clientele of the establishment, some of whom had left their Oscars on the mantelpiece in gratitude for services rendered. The tip-off came from some well-known restaurants along the Strip, who were outraged at Billie's plans to go legit and open a proper, swank, and competing restaurant on their high-toned turf. Dozens of male stars, as well as producers and scenarists, suddenly took off for the four posters of the world, accepting work in Europe or suddenly needed vacations. The studios applied pressure and succeeded in hushing the matter up. Within a few months, the vacationers trickled back to California. In 1952, the movie capital had not entirely recovered from the Billie Bennett affair when a little magazine published in New York appeared on newsstands all over the country. This new offspring of yellow journalism soon became the talk of the town and, Confidential, acquired a reputation as the worst kind of rag, but everyone read it anyway. Its motto was, tells the facts and names the names. Scandal sheets were nothing new. There had been successful professional gossip mongers for decades, including the vicious Westbrook Pegler, malicious Walter Winchell, that holy terror Elza Maxwell, and of course, Tinseltown's own innuendo specialist, Hedda and Luella. But perfidious Confidential carried things further than any of the rumor mongers had done, went into great detail and did not hesitate to affirm that the stories it published were a faithful account of the facts. Confidential's publisher, Robert Harrison, had conceived the idea for the magazine after watching the daily televised Kefauver crime investigations. When he observed that these journalistic reports on vice, crime, and prostitution eclipsed all other programs and in the ratings, he deduced that the public was hungry for gossip and that a publication which presented such material in a spicy manner and did, in effect, name names, would go over big. Harrison had started out in the 1920s as an office boy of the Daily Graphic, that's graphic with a capital C at the end, a scandal sheet which in many ways were a precursor of Confidential. He then worked for Martin Quigley, pious publisher of Motion Picture Herald, and on his own had put on a fetish series, High-Heeled Women with Whip Types magazines, whose circulations were falling off by the time he conceived the Confidential idea. The first issue did phenomenally well and sold $250,000 copies. At its peak, Confidential was selling 4 million copies on newsstands, a record for American journalism. Harrison embarked on a large-scale attack on the private lives of America's most famous citizens. His formula was simple: a well-known name, an unflattering photograph, and a story, fairly short, which presented a sordid episode in a mocking, humorous manner. He knew what his customers wanted. He confided to friends, quote, "Americans like to read about things which they are afraid to do themselves," end quote. With the success of the magazine, its victims were increasingly those Hollywood luminaries whose private lives were of the most morbid interest to the public. Harrison set up an agency in Hollywood run by his niece, Marjorie Mead. It was given the pretentious moniker Hollywood Research Incorporated. Shady shamuses, would-be starlets, has-been hams, and faded journalists were hired to rattle, prattle, and tattle. The success of Confidential enabled Harrison to pay up to $1,000 per gossip item, assuring him a fine stable of spies. Sometimes eminent showbiz personalities themselves would be informants on the colleagues. Mike Todd called Harrison from California to fill him in on a juicy story concerning Harry Cohn, much hated president of Columbia. Many researchers were call girls. In fact, in the nucleus of the organization was the bevy of pinup girls who adorned the bars of Sunset Strip. In bed, these high-priced floozies received the confidences of famous stars, while a miniature tape recorder inside their purse, left carelessly open on the bedside table, recorded by night the indiscretions devoured later by avid readers. Hollywood Research unearthed compromising photographs and films and made use of the latest technical refinements, infrared and ultra-rapid film, high-powered telephoto lenses. This was the fashion in which the domestic feuds of Anita Ekberg and Anthony Steele were snooped upon. When particularly compromising material had been gathered, an agent of Hollywood Research visited the star involved with a copy in hand. It was suggested to the victim that the original might be purchased. Some paid, panic-stricken. Others refused. Stories which were not bought out of existence included Elizabeth Scott among the girls, Dan Daly in drag, Errol Flynn and his two-way mirrors, the best pumper in Hollywood, Marilyn Monroe, Joan Crawford and the handsome bartender. This reign of terror lasted for 4 years. Considerable but unacknowledged assistance was given Harrison by two of New York's established gossipists. Walter Winchell and Lee Mortimer. Mortimer, columnist and film critic for the now-defunct Daily Mirror magazine, would meet Harrison in a phone booth, slip him a juicy story, and if by chance they turned up that evening in the same nightery, the two men would pretend to be feuding and not speak to each other. Harrison often gave Winchell friendly plugs in the magazine and stories in which someone else was given the axe. For example, Winchell was right about Josephine Baker, etc. In return, Winchell often plugged the magazine on television. While the success and obscenities of Confidential magazine increased with every issue, there was practically no film star who escaped its revelations. Some were victims of a whole series of stories. Marilyn, Orson, Lena, Ava, Frank, and Jane. Ensconced in New York, Harrison made sure that each article was based on a piece of film or tape recording, evidence which was checked by his shyster lawyers before publication. But with increasing success and no prosecutions, he began to embroider truth with picturesque details and overreached himself. He became one of the most hated men in the country. During a hunting expedition in Santo Domingo, someone took a few pot shots at him. One day, Grace Kelly's father dropped into his New York office to smash up the place and take a poke at Harrison the day after an expose had appeared about the future Princess of Monaco. It was not until February of 1957 that a star finally had the courage to decide that enough was enough. Dorothy Dandridge filed suit against the magazine after an article appeared dealing with her alleged exploits in a forest in Naturalist Company. Dandridge asked for $2 million in damages. With the firing of the first shot, the war was on. Dozens of stars who had been slandered filed suits. When this happened, the movie industry bigwigs decided that there was a new danger. The most important personalities of Hollywood would be quizzed in public about their private lives. The gray eminences once more attempted what had been successfully done in earlier scandals: hush it up. Hollywood public relations man Robert Murphy was sent to the state capitol for talks with the attorney general. He went so far as to threaten to withdraw the financial aid the movie industry was planning to grant the next Republican campaign. But the state persisted in its plan to take action. Thus, many stars found it advisable to take a vacation. Clark Gable went to sunbathe in Tahiti, while others took off for Europe or South America. The trial finally started in Los Angeles, August 2, 1957. The press called it the Trial of 100 Stars. Actually, after a brief appearance by Dorothy Dandridge, who withdrew her complaint after considerable out-of-court settlement, the trial counted only one other star: beautiful redhead Maureen O'Hara. Confidential magazine had informed its literati that Miss O'Hara had indulged in a Chinese chess game in the, Chinese chest, that is, game in the plush seats of the lodge section of Grauman's Chinese Theater. Her playmate was said to have been an attractive South American. Confidential related, quote, "The ushers saw a couple who heated up the balcony as if it were July. Maureen, blouse unbuttoned and her hair in disarray, had assumed in order to watch the movie the oddest posture ever to be beheld in the entire history of motion pictures. She was stretched out on 3 seats, the lucky South American occupying the middle chair, while a picture denouncing juvenile delinquency was being shown on screen," etc., etc., ad nauseum. Judge Walker felt additional information was required. The scene was reenacted in the balcony. Reenacted, oh my god. Okay. The manager of Grauman's agreed to play the part of the South American. A young woman reporter was a stand-in for the star. The manager sat down, the double stretched out, and even raised her legs in the air. The jury wanted further information. Yeah, I bet they did. All 12, including 6 dowagers, repaired to row 35, where a minute examination of the 3 seats in question showed them no different than any others in the theater. Maureen did not appear until August 17th. She proved that at the time of the alleged frolics in the balcony of Grauman's, she had been in Spain. Her passport was entered as proof. She asked for $5 million in damages. The witnesses persisted, in spite of her passport proof of absence, insisting that it had been the actress they had seen in the loge. Her sister, an Irish nun, emerged from a convent to come to her defense. The court brought in a lie detector, which did not prove that Maureen was telling the truth. The hung jury finally reached a compromise. The obscenity charges were dismissed. Confidential only had to cough up $5,000. There were many out-of-court settlements, however, which when added up, came to a lively sum. The magazine paid $40,000 to Liberace, and almost as much to a dozen other celebrities. The biggest actual drama of the case came with the suicide of Polly Gould, of the magazine's editorial staff. She killed herself on the night of August 16th. She was to testify the following day. It was then discovered that Polly had been playing a double game, selling the secrets of the magazine to the DA and informing Harrison of the maneuvers of the police. Following the trial, Howard Rushmore, Harrison's editor-in-chief on Confidential, a paranoiac ex-communist, Rushmore had recently started on an anti-communist crusade, pulled out a gun while riding in a cab with his wife in New York's Upper East Side, shot Mrs. Rushmore, then killed himself. Harrison sold Confidential in 1957. Subsequently, he started all over again with a minor tabloid called Inside News. It didn't achieve its predecessor's fame. The days of this type of expose were numbered. America's movie industry has declined. The public gets more mindless gossip than it can absorb daily on TV, and moreover, its shockability quotient has diminished. There are no longer more stars at MGM than in the heavens. If that studio can be said to exist at all anymore, it is as an empty planetarium. The few remaining movie celebrities are more than thankful to attract some attention by discussing their foibles themselves on TV talk shows. In fact, after The Confidential Affair, stars like Errol Flynn, Zsa Zsa Gabor, and Diane Barrymore started coming out with their own tell-all autobiographies. Why let others cash in on their private lives when they could rake in the bread for themselves? No magazine can continue to compete with that. That is the end of that awesome chapter.